Thank you for tuning into Literary Blend, a publishing podcast. I'm your host, Demi Michelle Schwartz. There's no perfect recipe for chasing a dream in the publishing industry, but I hope the conversations on this show give you the ingredients you need to bake yours into reality. So let's flip the page and get into this chapter of Literary Blend. Hi, friends. Welcome back to Literary Blend. Today's chapter is called Research and Realism. And joining me on the show is someone I'm so excited to have a chat with. Joining me from all the way in Malaysia is Ian Tan. Hi, Ian.
Hey, how's it going?
Great. How's it going for you?
It's good. It's good. I'm real excited to be on this podcast. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to have you to chat all about research and realism. But before we get into that conversation, I would love for you to share a little about yourself and your journey in publishing so far.
Oh, sure. Okay, so I started out as a freelance editor back in 2021. Yeah, very early into the pandemic. I found work with Abby Wild, one of my an old friend and colleague back in my alma mater, and she was starting up her publishing company then, Wilding Publishing, and she got me a position as a freelance editor on her team, and that's just what I've been doing since. I've It's been such a privilege and pleasure to join her staff and meet all sorts of people that I otherwise wouldn't have met. Um, and it's been cool. It's been a cool ride. It's been okay 3 years now, coming up on four, and it's just been a sweet ride. Yeah. When I'm okay, what else? When I'm not writing or reading or editing, I'm just brainstorming or doing research for my current novels. Yeah, I'm working on my own novels at the moment.
Fabulous. Well, I'm so excited that we're both involved with Wild Ink. It's an amazing publisher. Abby's lovely, and I actually got to work with you for Uncensored Ink, which is coming out in October. We'll touch on that briefly toward the end to help push that a bit. It's a really great family, for sure.
It really is. We have we've been so blessed and so lucky to work with so many people around the United States and even outside the United States. So it's really cool. Yeah, I keep saying that, I know, but like it's there's this the there's just no other way to describe it. I think.
Absolutely. So let's transition into our chat about research and realism. And I really like this topic because research and realism, these are things that are necessary for all genres. We have to do a little more research if you're doing something like historical fiction, but even if you're writing speculative fiction, a brand new fantasy or sci fi world, every book requires some level of research in order to make that story realistic for the readers.
No, exactly, exactly. Over the years, I guess I've just slowly realized that the importance of research and realism fall into a general spectrum across all genres, like you said. Um, some genres rely on it more heavily than others, and like historical fiction, mystery, literary fiction, these hugely depend on research and realism. And then there's stuff in the middle, like fantasy or sci-fi, um, dystopia, and the research and realism just varies wildly across these like small, yeah, across speculative fiction. And then there's children's fiction, which mostly isn't that important. Mostly, yeah. But the main point after all this realization and this exploration is that engaging with engaging with these things provide more avenues to explore and develop our writing.
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest things is looking at the setting, especially even if you're writing a fictional town, for example. If it's set in our real world, readers are going to expect to see things that reflect the real world. Like, for example, in one of my books, it's set in a fictional forest in Colorado. And even though that forest does not exist in real life, I did a lot of research into what kind of forest animals, what kind of creatures, what kind of plant life is in Colorado forests because I want readers who especially live in that area to go, oh, yeah, I've seen this kind of snake out and about when I was walking around in Colorado, but even though it's a fictional forest, you still have these qualities in the setting that make readers immerse themselves into that area.
Exactly. Yeah. As editors and you listeners, you guys probably know that Demi is also an editor like myself. And one direction that we've often given many writers is the show more, tell less direction. That's a very age old one. And that just punctuates the value of realism, like Demi was talking about. It's all about immersion. The more in tune the writers are with atmospheres and environments, the better they'll be able to capture them on the page. Like the sensation of tasting a new dish that a character loves on the first bite. What's that like? What flavors are in play here. The more familiar writers are with these sensations, yeah, the better they can show them and rely less on telling. You
Yes.
know.
And I think one of the things is sometimes we can think super large scale, but sometimes it's the really tiny details that really make something immersive to a certain time or place, especially historical fiction. The little tiny details you can include from like that time period just really transports that reader. I think that's the biggest thing. When we sit down to read a book as readers, we want to be transported into a story world. And a way to do that is by creating that immersion and exploring these different settings and qualities of the time period, the place, the world, and all those things to really transport that reader to that setting. And it can be the tiniest thing. The tiniest details can really go a long way. And I do notice sometimes, especially when I'm editing for Amethyst Ink clients, sometimes the world building itself, like I have a very clear understanding of like the magic system and the gods and all of that. So the world building is there. But I notice that a lot of my suggestions are more on the scene level. Like I can't really ground myself in the scene. I don't really have a clear image in my head of like the exact setting I'm in right now. Maybe I have an understanding of the world as a whole, but if they're in like a medieval style castle, will make me feel like I'm in a medieval style castle.
Right. Yeah. And the best thing about that kind of about connecting realism to a fantastical setting is that you, as the writer, you get to control. You get to be the expert, if you will, of that world. And if you make it as substantial as you can, readers are going to take that at face value, as long as you engage with logic, and make things make sense. In a way, that's where the realism kicks in, and that's how readers can you can make your readers the buy that such a place exists, buy that such an experience exists, even though they know it's not really real. Yeah, I something that came to mind as I was preparing for this discussion is my one of my clients, KM King. She's this sweet middle aged author. She's brand new on the scene. She was so nervous when she came to work with me on her historical fiction, The Bomber Jacket, which launches in August 20th. Um, she wrote a book based off her personal experiences on a vacation in Scotland. Um, and and so much of the sensations and the descriptions that she incorporates in her book came from her journey, her travels in Scotland. And so that brings to mind the age old saying, write what you know. That's you know she's been there. She's been to Scotland. She's sampled the food. She's been to the cities. So that's one of the best ways, if not the best, to tap into realism.
Yeah, wherever you know, for sure. I think that's perfect. And even if you're writing about a place you've never visited, that's where the research comes in. You can talk to people who live there. You can watch YouTube videos of people doing like travel vlogs of like visiting the cities to like imagine what it's like to be there. You can read up on certain qualities about that place online. Like there are ways to get the information if you don't actually live in the place or if you've never visited the place. But I think another point here is to see if you can pull things into your stories, especially if they're speculative, like fantasy or science fiction. If you can use things that people will recognize in the real world to tie back to, that would be super interesting. So, for example, if you're creating a magic system, in one of my books, I have a birthstone magic system. And so I did a lot of research into what the different stones represent in different cultures and kind of created a magic system and characters' personalities based off of that. Similarly, like for if you're working on a book with color magic, you can look up color psychology and like what different colors symbolize to create their magic and what the magic does and what the characters are like. So there are a lot of things that we can do because say you write about something that is super rooted into a certain culture, but it's reflected in a fantasy magic system. Well, people from that culture will be able to look at it and be like, oh, that's super cool. Like, yes, this is a fantasy story, but that totally tracks and this makes sense to the lore and the different beliefs of that culture. So that's something we can do. And another point I wanted to make, kind of tying into this, is we can do similar things with characters. So I was just at a writing conference at Seton Hall University, and one of the classes I took was basically using astronomical signs for characterization. And it was really cool because like we learned about like the different signs and what they represent, what the characteristics are, all these different things. And then we were asked to create a character based on what their personality would be like, what their backstory would be like, based on what their sign was. And so I thought that was really cool because I actually did it for a character of a book I'm going to be starting to write soon. And it was really interesting because I already had qualities of that character in mind. And then once I decided what I wanted to do, like for her sign, it just started to fall into place. And I feel like I discovered more about her. And so you can even lean into certain kind of research aspects too to develop your characters.
Absolutely. It's like it goes back to that line I had earlier. The more in tune you are with your material, your source, the better you'll be able to capture that quality on the page, whether it's a character or a setting, or an experience. It just takes research and knowledge. I want to segue real quick here, because we are talking a lot about um, and we are talking a lot about knowing what we know, right? Sorry, knowing what we write, and that's the thing. It's a lot of people equate research to googling, doing a quick internet search, um, especially if you're new to writing. But I would encourage listeners to experiment beyond Google. Um, you know, uh, Try to talk to experts if you can get access to them. If you're writing a war story, tr- try visiting like a military museum or even talking to a veteran if they're okay with sharing their story. Um, 2 hours of chatting with them, you never know what you'll find out. Suddenly, you might get insight that might otherwise be difficult to find on the internet. Um, yeah, if you look at our uncensored ink anthology coming out this October, there's a short essay, I should say, uh, of a veteran. He kept his name. I think it's he. Um, kept kept their name anonymous. So yeah. Anyway, that person told their whole life story of being in the army. And yeah, it's a very grisly story. Um, but it's a you know what that kind of stuff you might want to look into when you're writing a war story, and suddenly yeah, you suddenly know ways to make it personal, for lack of a better word, or yeah, absolutely, just talk to people, if you can, and do it politely, ask kindly, and maybe they'll share their story, or maybe if your fantasy story has like centaurs or unicorns, maybe consider interviewing a horse breeder. They might be able to share some valuable insights on horse anatomy because of their expertise.
I think it's really cool when you can talk to people because you're exactly right that you can maybe Google for the basic information, but when you talk to somebody, you're going to get a real life personal account of something. And there are
Right.
gems in personal experiences that you're not going to be able to find online. And I think
Yeah.
that's really fun. And just to like talk to people, learn about others' experiences, and to get knowledge that you need directly from the source. Like, my sister's a doctor. Every time I have medical questions, I ask her. I can Google it and it'll give me like 1,000 different things of different people. Like, a lot of it, like, when you Google, like, I don't know, like, medical internet, like, I'm a hypochondriac and I'll Google stuff, be like, oh my God, like, do I have this now? It's like, never Google medical stuff. Just PSA, don't do that. So I asked my sister, and I've actually talked to a pharmacist once when I was writing one of my books. I interviewed a police officer that my dad was friends with, and he gave me like he worked multiple homicides, and this was when I was writing my mystery, and so I interviewed him about like what it's like to basically run a murder investigation, and it was really funny because I was asking him all these super specific questions, and he was like, "Are you plotting a murder?" I was like, "Yes, I am, but it's fictional. Don't worry." But it's just really fun to like pick people's brains and like learn that way and expand your knowledge about the world in general.
Yeah. Yes. And I think it also makes you humbler as a person, as a writer. You're admitting that you're not the expert, and you draw your knowledge, you draw your insight and your inspiration from those who have that experience, and it just makes, there's never any harm in it. I don't think, it makes your story more grounded. Right. Right. And what was I saying? Yeah, no, I think that overall is that humility in asking, that humility in research, ultimately is what makes your story more relatable, for readers, because yeah, you've put yourself out there and you've dug for information, and you know at the end of the day, you have material that you can turn into experiences that readers can relate to, because they came from a true source. um yeah.
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 No, that's perfect. And people love to talk about themselves and their experiences. So I guarantee you, if you ask someone about like something specific in your book that they're an expert on, they will probably be super excited to like share their knowledge with you and just have a conversation about something they're passionate about. Like if someone came to me about like music stuff, I'd be like, yes, please, let's talk for like an hour. I got you. Let's go. So people like to talk about stuff that they like know a lot about. And I think, one of the last points I want to make is that research is very important and we all have to do it, whether you are writing your first book or whether you are a New York Times bestseller and you're on your like 20th book. We're all doing research. And I know that for some, research isn't fun. For me, I love it. I really like to learn more about the world around me. I love gaining more knowledge. But for any authors who are hesitant about research or maybe they don't like it a whole lot, what advice do you have for them to hopefully get them to love the research process a little more?
Okay, that's a very good question, Demi. Okay, so for someone who's a little hesitant about research, I would say give yourself lots of room to take breaks if the work becomes too tedious or boring or too much like homework, you know. I get that not everyone is used to spending a lot of time sitting in front of a screen, or spending a lot of time in a library, you know, digging through archives. That's totally fair. So I would say just give yourself a lot of grace for it. If if you can't spend a lot of time in those spaces doing research, I would say, you know, whatever's best for you. If you can only do 5 minutes in a library, then 5 minutes at a time. Sure, you know, no one's yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, so the one thing I'll add is, which makes it a little easier for me, especially even though I love research, it can be overwhelming if you look at it like, oh my gosh, I need to research all this stuff. So what I do is I make a list of things I have to research, and I typically do this because I'm a plotter. I typically do this before I start drafting because it takes me out of the creative flow if I need to stop every 2 seconds to Google something. So I try to like figure out what I need to know in advance. And then as I'm writing, like there's always things that pop up that I have to research like in the moment. But if I have the majority of it researched beforehand, it doesn't really interfere with my creative process. And so what I'll do is I'll make a list of like, okay, these are the things I need to know in order to make this work. And then I'll research those things and then I'll have a direction for the research instead of just vaguely researching. Like say you're setting a book in Ireland, instead of just vaguely researching like Ireland and like what is this setting in Ireland? Like you'll get like so much and it'll be really vague. And so if you have very specific and you're targeting things like with very specific questions and what exactly you want to learn in order to write the book, you get your answers quicker and you have a more guided research process if you have those specific points in ahead of time.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, very very useful information. That I used to not what you call it. I used to not make organized lists like this. I used to just, you know, get a name in my head and just go off and then research off that name, and then not have anywhere tidy to store that information, um, which really made research much more frustrating. Um, but yeah, yeah, totally make a list, and again, give yourself time, give yourself grace to figure out your research style. Not everyone, again, as you can draw from this interview, not every research style is the same. It's not always about the internet, and it doesn't have to be talking to people. I would say mix it up too. If you know, if there's one thing you can take away from all this is, you know, do what's needed, do what you need, do what your story needs. Have fun. Yeah.
Yes, have
Okay.
fun. Writing should be fun.
If it's not fun, then, you know, maybe, yeah, step back. Yeah,
Yeah.
step back and yeah, have fun. Have fun.
Yeah. Well, this was a fabulous chat about research and realism. It was a joy chatting with you about all of this, and this brings us to the plot twist. Are you ready?
Yep.
Awesome. So, this episode's coming out on your birthday. So,
Thank you.
your question is if you could imagine baking a cake that is publishing themed, how would you decorate it and what would the flavor be?
Very, very, very fun question. Um, Let me think on that. Okay, so I recently got into s- well, I recently got interested in the topic of sailing, like sailboats and stuff like that. So I think the design of my cake would be a boat, a sailboat, um, and it would be chocolate. You know, because, you know, the chocolate would be the brown of the wood and everything, and I guess white chocolate maybe would make the sails of the boat. Yeah, I'm not a baker, so we'll. I guess I have to look up sell both cakes on Pinterest now.
And then how about we
But
get a publishing flair? What publishing related thing would you include?
okay, so book related. Oh, okay. The okay. I think I'll put the name of the yeah. I'll put the name of the book onto the ship as the ship's name.
Yeah.
Uh, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, the name of the book right now is Searching Humanity.
Oh,
So that's the boat's name as well as the book's name.
awesome. Oh, I love it. Well, happy birthday, because this comes out on your birthday.
So much. Oh man, this is so kind. Thank you, Jenny. Oh man.
Awesome. Well, it was a delight having you on this show. Can you please share with everybody where they can connect with you online?
Okay. So on Twitter, you guys can find me on Ian's Quill, one. So capital letter I, uh, and then S Ian's, and then capital letter Q, and then just the number one. So Ian's Quill one.
Fantastic. And would you like to briefly plug Uncensored Ink coming in October?
Yes, good idea. Okay, so everyone, I've been working hard editing a banned book anthology uh, um, that includes 20 or more than 20 writers across the United States and even some outside. And one of them is Demi here. And it's just been great working with all these people. And we release on October 31st. So not banned books week, but in banned book month, I guess. um, yeah, so in the meantime, we still have some promos to do, so keep an eye out on my Twitter, which I just gave Demi. Yeah, yeah, and keep an eye on Demi's socials because he's gonna be promoting that as well.
Yes. So I believe it's coming out October 29th. I believe that's the date it's coming out. Definitely stay tuned for that. That will be published through Routing Publishing. And so we'll have lots more information about that as it approaches. But thank you so much again for joining me on the show to chat all about research and realism.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And listeners, that is a wrap on this chapter with Ian about research and realism. If you enjoyed our conversation, please consider leaving Literary Blend a review and giving it 5 stars to help others just like you discover it. Also, if you have friends in publishing you think would enjoy the show, please pass it along to them. Thank you for listening, and until we flip to the next chapter, happy reading and writing.